I got the number for the hiring department, and for a solid year, I called every week and they would answer the phone, and they saw that I had persistence and I wanted that job more than anybody else that was reaching out to them.
Today on 55 Creative Hub, we welcome the legend behind the lights. He's retired, senior lighting designer who's eliminated shows like The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, all kinds of soap operas, game shows, as well as working internationally. One of the greats who has shaped the modern television lighting look. Please welcome Brian McRae. Brian McRae, thank you for joining Creative Hub Talk today.
My pleasure, Bert. Thanks for having me. It's my honor. Thank you.
I really appreciate having this conversation. I'm a frustrated lighting guy myself.
Are
I used
you?
to be a show director, but lighting to me
That's
was
nice.
so important on every project that I worked.
Oh, yeah.
I really think it, as good as the talent could be, if we're not making the talent look good, and that's the lighting, right? I always felt lighting
Yeah,
was very
absolutely.
important. So tell me about your most drastic or most stressed technical issue that you've had on a show.
I would have to say it was for Good Morning America. This was probably 8 or 9 years ago. We were doing a live feed with the Pope out of Los Angeles. And because it was live to the East Coast, we were in at 3 o'clock in the morning, if I recall, 2 or 3 o'clock. And unfortunately, the lighting console operator overslept, and he was actually in Simi Valley, which, for those of you who know Los Angeles, is not close to downtown LA. So we couldn't bring the lights up, and we had a room full of people, and we had the Pope's feed all set up, and he was ready to go, and New York, of course, was ready to go, but we had no lights. So for the next 27 minutes or so, I had to make up stories as to why we didn't have them and try to reassure the director in New York that they were coming up. But in the back of my mind, I thought this could just be it. I could just go back to the hotel now and pack my bags and go home, because if we don't bring them up, how do you answer that? So anyway, thankfully, we finally got a hold of him. Somebody had his number at home and managed to wake him up, and he talked us through getting the console up. And I think it was about 7 minutes before airtime, we actually brought everything up, and it all went well after that. But that was probably the closest I came to not being able to make a broadcast. And at that point, I was 49 years into my career, so that was like I
Crazy.
got lucky. So anyway,
So I'm gonna go a little bit more into that. So those that
sure.
time between the you didn't know the guy's gonna make it and the lights come up. What was that leadership like? Was everyone looking at you trying to figure out, well, what are we gonna do next? Are you looking at other people saying, oh no, we're not gonna make it? How was that leadership for you? What did you do?
Well, I think my way of dealing with a situation like that, Bert, was to internalize it. Because I always felt this way in my career, that the crew reacted to my behavior. And if I lost control of what the situation was, I was going to lose the crew. And I didn't want to do that. So I kept it inside, even though I was clearly concerned about what was happening. I had to convey that to New York as well, as I said to the director, because they wanted the lights up so they could do a look see and make sure the cameras all looked good. Because at that time, everything was being controlled from New York. But I knew that I needed to maintain composure. And that was something I learned over time. When I started my career and I was a 24, 25-year-old big shot at NBC, I was a different person then. But in time, you learn how to react better, and that the crew's behavior does depend on your behavior. So that's kind of how I handle it. So
It's
it
it,
worked out okay.
it's interesting, you mentioned 49 years later is when something like this happened,
Yeah.
when you were 25 years old, you thought you knew it all.
Yeah.
And as you go through your experiences, were there people that helped you along the way, or was it just experiences that matured you?
One of the first shows I did when I was at NBC, Bert, was called Santa Barbara. And that's really why I was hired. It was a new soap opera that was going to be done differently than anything else had been done before in the soap genre at NBC in particular. And they challenged us to try new things. Don't do soaps in the same typical way that they were done. And my partner, Teddy Pomansky, bless him, he's passed on. We were like brothers, and we drove each other artistically. There was always an unspoken competition between the two of us, even though we were very close. It was a very healthy competition between the two of us, and it forced us to try to outperform each other every day. And as it turned out, we were fairly successful on Santa Barbara. We won 3 Emmy Awards together on that show in an 8-year period. I think we were nominated almost every year, at least 7 out of the 8 years. So it was a great learning experience.
Was that your first job in lighting, or how did you end up at NBC?
If you'd like, I can back up and kind of start at the beginning and talk to you about how I morphed into lighting, because I actually started out as a cameraman.
Oh, I'd love to. Yes, go for it.
All right. Well, when I was 16, I wanted to be a disc jockey. And
wait a minute, wait. You want to be a camera guy, then you want to be a disc jockey. Disc jockey, music, got it.
I grew up listening to the radio, Bert, like a lot of us did back in those days. And I would listen to AM radio, top 40 hits, on KSTT in Davenport, Iowa, and WLS in Chicago, and stations like that, which were just powerhouses. And I thought it seemed like such a cool gig to be a DJ, because guys in those days they were stars, the big DJs. So anyway, I had my stepmother had a brother who worked, or actually knew people at the television station in Davenport, Iowa. It was WOC television. And they also had an AM and an FM radio station. So she got me an interview at 16 years old. And I went in and I met Ed Zach. He was the program director, and he was gracious enough to sit down with this punk kid and say, "What are you interested in?" And I naively said, "Well, Mr. Zach, I'd like to be a disc jockey." And I was a junior in high school. And he said, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Okay, well, we don't really have anything in radio right now. Are you interested in television? I said, sure, I'll do that for a while. And then once a DJ job opens up, I'll just move right into that. It made sense to me at 16. And I can still remember him smiling, looking at me across the desk. Well, long story short, Bert, they hired me to be on the stage crew. And I never looked back.
So when you say television, what was the television? Was it local news? Was it morning show?
Back in those days, first of all, it was non-union, so we could do anything we wanted. I could touch anything I wanted to. Started out running camera. We did obviously local news, 6 and 10 o'clock news. Back in those days, the FCC had requirements, so you had to do public service shows. We did a church show. We did a show called High School Bowl, which was an academic competition between local high schools. So I ran camera for a long time, and then I started to dabble a little bit with the lights. But probably the biggest jump for me was I became a director. And by the time I left, I was directing the 6 and 10 o'clock newscast. We were the number 1 station in the market and had been for decades. And we were really above everyone else by a long shot in terms of the quality and the professionalism of our broadcast. So at 17 now, I'm directing the 6 and 10 o'clock news. I'm not going to prom. I'm not doing any of that stuff in school. I was so immersed in being in television, it just consumed me. And so, as I mentioned, we were non-union, and I decided, being full of energy and whatnot at that time, that along with some other folks, we were going to try to form a union. Well, this was a non-union station, and I didn't understand there were consequences to doing anything like that. I just plowed straight forward, with trying to do that. And I got a call into the general manager's office one day. I'll never forget it. Lee Martz was his name. And he said, "Brian," he said, "come have a seat." He said, "I understand that you're interested in forming a union here at the station. And that's not something we're really interested in. It might be time for you. You've talked about going to Chicago. Maybe now might be a good time for you to do that." So there went my trying to form a union part of my career. And I went off to Chicago.
So when you had that moment with the general manager, that was the turning point, because you thought you were going one way, and then all of a sudden you were made to go a different way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And truth be known, Bert, I probably would have stayed in that market and just continued to direct the 6 and 10 o'clock news, got married, had a family, and probably never left. But there was something inside me that lit a fire under me when I got fired. I'd never been fired. it really hurt because
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know if I had a future left, and I loved the television business so much.
Mm.
It became a part of my identity and who I was. I was very proud of what I did because most of my friends were working at local restaurants, if they were working at all, bus boys, that kind of thing. And keep in mind, I was a junior moving into my senior year in high school, and I had this fancy job at the number one station in the market.
Mm.
And I felt very good about that. It made me feel good as a person. So when that got taken away, that was quite a blow.
So when you went to Chicago, what did you just go on a whim? Did you have a job? What was
Well, I
that like?
didn't have a job. But back in those days, Bert, you bounce from market to market. It's a little different now because those training grounds really don't exist any longer.
That's right.
Not the way they did when we came up.
I agree.
So we were the 76th market in Davenport, and my next logical step was to move to Chicago, live with my aunt and uncle who lived in Evanston. They took me in, still devastated from losing the job, but it was a big market. So I went up there and I just made phone call after phone call. And I finally got a job at Telemation Productions in Glenview, which was a commercial production house. I didn't know anything about Telemation until I got to Chicago and started looking around and making phone calls and talking to people and getting my name out there. And thankfully, I got hired. But it was primarily as a camera op. So as far as studio production, I went backwards, if you will, from directing and producing to camera, but at least got my foot in the door. And commercials were something I'd never done before. So I spent quite a bit of time on a crane, Steadicam, did a lot of handheld work and obviously pedestal work, which helped me hone my craft with cameras even more. We had one lighting designer, his name was Kim Walton, and we got so busy at Telemation that they came to me and said, because I would sit on the crane and just watch in between takes while he was tweaking and resetting and whatever for a commercial or industrial, whatever we were doing. And I would just take things in. Had never really done real lighting before that, but they came to me one day and said, "Are you interested in maybe doing the new?" It was a commercial for Marshall Field, which was a huge department store in Chicago at the time, and it was a big account for us. So for them to ask me was a big deal.
So tell me a little bit about the gear back then. I mean, compared to today, DMX and LED. Tell me a little bit about the gears back then.
Well, the biggest difference that it comes to my mind is the heat. The kids nowadays don't understand with all LED fixtures, you don't generate any heat. And if you're in a stage that's got a 12-foot ceiling and a 10-foot grid, there's no room for that heat to escape. And everything we were using was PARs. We used the big mole soft lights, which generated a ton of heat.
Yeah.
Size of the fixtures, when you're dealing with mole 2Ks, mole 5Ks, and I-10ers, things like that, I'll get to that later because those were our workhorses at NBC when I was there.
So how about working with you started doing lighting
Yeah.
and you're doing the commercials. What happened from there? How did you end up in California?
Well, I was, obviously living in Chicago and cruising along, and I got a phone call one night, and it was the middle of winter, and it was from a producer who I had worked with in Chicago, and he had moved to San Diego. And I had never been to California, Bert. All I knew about California was the TV shows that I saw growing up, palm trees I saw in pictures, pretty girls and beaches. That's all I knew. But it was all based on books and television shows and movies. And so the phone rang one night, and it was Richard Schreier was his name, and he changed my life
Hmm.
profoundly.
Hmm.
He said, "Hey, you interested in moving to California?" And I thought about it for 0.3 seconds.
It was winter in
And
Chicago.
yeah, winter in Chicago. It was probably 20 below. God knows whatever. But anyway, long story short, I packed my Camaro. Luckily, I wasn't involved with anybody at that time, so it was easy. And I packed my Camaro up with whatever I had, my clothes, my guitar, and off I went.
So that's the second influential person in your life, right? The first one was the general manager who
Yeah,
did a
yeah, yeah,
decision for you, and then
yeah.
this big move to California.
That's right. That's
That's
right. So
great.
Richard, he had a new show. Cable TV was new at this point,
Hmm.
and there was a cable channel called the Entertainment Channel. And this was just after, back in those days, TBS, Turner Broadcasting, would have been probably, and WGN in Chicago were
Hmm.
probably the first two big powerhouse cable
Yes.
networks because that
I
was
remember.
all new.
Yep.
So, anyway, the Entertainment Channel had begun, and they had a show called The Animal Express. And I came out to be the director of photography on that. And it was 18 months of working at the San Diego Zoo, the San Diego Wild Animal Park, and SeaWorld.
That's
And we
cool.
did half-hour children's shows. And I was outside every day in San Diego, California, at 20 years old at this point, in a short sleeve shirt and shorts, with a camera on my shoulder and a lighting setup with me. And there were three guys on my team. There was a tape operator. Imagine that we had tape operators, right? Uh, I think it was all 1 inch at that point, and might have been 3/4. But anyway, in a PA and a producer, and we went out for 18 months and we made shows for kids about animals,
That's great.
and it was the best gig. It wasn't big lighting because most of it was just create illumination for whatever the environment happened to be.
Even as a photographer, right? You were the DP. You had to
Yeah.
look for the composition to make sure the lighting was okay. You didn't
Oh
have
yeah.
fixtures,
Yeah.
but you had to make sure
Yeah.
that the lighting of the sun or the shadows, you were looking for that. It was the beginning.
Absolutely.
You had to learn from
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. And the thing that pops into my head that we learn about too is, and a lot of us old school guys, and a lot of guys like us who had done a lot of location work, you have to make it work. If you don't have widget A, you figure out how to make the look you need work with a piece of string and a stick and a whatever.
Yep.
If you need a bounce, you take a thing that's white. It doesn't have to be a fancy labeled lighting product. You take a paper towel that's white, you bounce it, whatever.
Yep.
That's kind of basic, but you understand what I'm saying. We,
I
we just
understand.
made
Listen,
it up. And
I have a story there. There was one time we were out in the middle of nowhere and we needed a bounce. And we had a carton of milk.
yep,
And we drank the milk, opened up the carton, and we used that little white as a bounce to get a
perfect.
little
Yeah,
fill,
yeah.
right? I mean,
Oh yeah, perfect.
you had to make it up. You had to make it up.
Yeah, absolutely. And you put all those little things in your toolbox. So later on in life, if you need something, you can make it work. And it builds your confidence as well,
That's right.
knowing that no matter what the environment you're in is, you can make it work. But did that for 18 months. And then that contract ran out and I was out of a job. Now, I will say this. So while I was in San Diego to augment my income, because I had a strong camera op background, I started doing Chargers football. I did a lot of Padres baseball, and I did the Clippers. Were back the NBA team was in San Diego at that time. I did hockey and I did soccer as well. So it gave me a chance to really keep my chops wet with quick response work. Then once that contract was up, it was now what do I do time.
Yeah.
At that, and again, now we're talking markets. Even though San Diego was a step down market size from Chicago, it was still close enough to Los Angeles that I felt that I had positioned myself correctly to make the next move. Uh, and I always wanted to work at NBC.
Hmm.
That was my goal.
Hmm.
Again, back in those days, it was incremental steps in markets until you reach the network.
That's right.
That was the goal.
That's right.
And for me, it was NBC because we were an NBC affiliate. So when the contract was up in San Diego, the next logical move was to go to Los Angeles.
Hmm.
So my girlfriend and I packed up everything and went to LA. Ended up living in a house with four other people overlooking Universal Studios, and I had no job.
Hmm.
And I thought that this hotshot camera guy who does sports was going to waltz into Los Angeles, make a couple phone calls, let him know that I was here, and I'm ready to start on Monday.
Hmm.
What I didn't remember was that there are also 40 other guys who could do low third, high first, high home, center field, and they could be on the floor at the Laker games, other than me. So it didn't happen as quickly as I thought it would. But I just kept plowing away at it, and I finally developed enough relationships where I started doing some freelance camera work, doing sports, and that kept me fed and kept the roof over our head. But in the back of my mind, I wanted to go to NBC. That was the pinnacle for me. So I literally, I got the number for the hiring department at NBC in Burbank. And for a solid year, no exaggeration, I called every week to that number, and they would answer the phone. And it started out very, in a very benign way, but eventually they got to know me, and they saw that I had persistence, and I wanted that job more than anybody else that was reaching out to them. So for a year, I called that number and spoke to Janice. I'll never forget her name. And after a year, I was sitting in the front yard of the house we were renting overlooking Universal, wondering what am I going to do next? I'm not making a ton of money freelancing camera work, doing sports, even though I loved it. It wasn't enough to survive on long term. And because the sports camera world in LA was really solid. There are some fantastic shooters, just like Miami. There's some great shooters in Miami.
Yes.
And you just don't break into that world easily. It's a tight world. Yes. And those guys don't want to give up their gigs because those are golden jobs.
If you're creating content in today's media landscape, speed, quality, and distribution all matter. That's where 55 Creative Hub comes in. A full-service production space built for creators, brands, and production teams, studios, post-production, global distribution, all under one roof. Focus on the idea and we will help you bring it to life. 55 Creative Hub, ideas made real.
So anyway, sitting out in the front yard one day and the phone rang. I picked it up, and just like what happened in Chicago with my move to San Diego, it was Janice from NBC. And she said, we want to know if you're interested in coming in and becoming a lighting designer for this new soap opera we have called Santa Barbara. We built a brand new stage for it, Studio 11 in Burbank, and we'd like to interview you. And I knew that I couldn't say no. I had no clue what I was doing. That job was so far above anything I had ever done, Bert, but I knew that the door had cracked open and I had to put my foot through it and have the courage to figure it out fast. So I went in and I did an interview with Jim Smith. He was the director of engineering at the time. And I'll never forget walking into Studio 11. There were 900 brand new Mole Richardson fixtures hanging in the grid. The studio was brand new. All the barn doors were closed. They were all aimed the same direction. They had never been touched. And I walked through this stage, and I had never seen a stage that big in my life. It was overwhelming. And it was right next to Studio 9 on the lot there. I don't know if you're familiar with that. But he said, so what do you think? And I looked at him and I said, I think we're in good shape.
And how did you balance your learning? You have your creativity that you're trying to implement, and then the technical side. How did you balance all that?
Well, it was fear was probably my biggest motivator, because I knew I had to be a sponge and I had to learn as much about being in a network as I could. I was overwhelmed. There's no question about that, but I couldn't show it.
Right.
Because, as you know, Bert, when you're at that level of production, you have to have a certain amount of confidence about you, because it's the top of the game. Whether it's Telemundo, Univision, NBC, ABC, CBS, that's the cream of the crop. And I knew that I was never going to get this opportunity again, and that I couldn't blow it. So I became a sponge. I would go from one studio to the next and just watch how they did things. In those days, Bert, Bob Hope would be in that studio doing a special. Motown would be in that studio doing a special. Wheel of Fortune was right there. Johnny Carson's right there. It was like being in a living encyclopedia of how the technology worked, how it integrated with producers and directors. And every studio was different. And it was like living in an encyclopedia of network television.
So how did you end up back in New York doing the Today Show and Good Morning America and all that? Am I jumping too fast from Santa Barbara?
No,
Where did you go?
not really. The one thing I would like to talk real quickly about, if you've got a second, is the diversity of production types that we had at the network lot. I did Santa Barbara. I did The Tonight Show. These are shows I actually lit. Wheel of Fortune,
Hmm.
Scrabble, Super Password, Days of Our Lives. Uh, Worked on a couple things with Bob Hope. The variety was tremendous, and they were all different.
That's my question. How did you approach each one? I mean, each one is a different type.
Completely. Well, the soap, the daytime dramas obviously were much more well crafted in terms of look. Um, and it didn't matter if it was Days of Our Lives or Santa Barbara. They were telenovelas. You know, they were prettier. They were you told the story. You just didn't light it. You know, for
Right.
example, when you're doing a game show, I'll use Scrabble as an example with with Chuck Woolery. Uh, Back in those days, the technology required so much level of light that we were using 10Ks
Hmm.
as the primary source. You know, they were a bit of a distance away, but you needed that volume of illumination to create a good picture.
And a game show that 10K was to give it a floodlight, right? There wasn't is it
Correct.
or there wasn't much layering of light. It was just you had to cover everything.
Correct. Yeah, there wasn't as much layering. You know, the nuance in soap operas was much greater. The
Right.
control that you needed of the instrument was much different. A lot
Right.
more flagging and cutting and being more precise with the fixtures and having intent behind it other than just illumination. And also, commercials taught me that. When I was working in Chicago, when you're doing close up work with a camera, there's no mistakes. Everything has to be just right. You use a dot for that, a finger for that. If I needed to cut a little thing, I'd put a clothespin on the end of a C stand. And if I just needed to cut just that little bit of stuff on that thing over there, and the clothespin just hanging on the C stand did it. That's what you did, but it was very finite.
I always find lighting to be an art, right? To use a clothespin just to take that little bit away, that's art.
It is. It makes a big difference, and soap operas taught me that. So,
Yeah.
so New York. Well, Santa Barbara got canceled. Unfortunately, should have never happened, but it did. You know, money talks and ratings talk and all of that, and it just didn't get the numbers eventually that they wanted. And then I was kind of in limbo after that. There was production was starting to slow way down at NBC in Burbank at that time, and my next mentor or guardian angel, if you will, Jill Phelps, who
Hmm.
I had met on Santa Barbara. She was an executive producer on Santa Barbara, had moved to New York and became the executive producer on Guiding Light for
Hmm.
CBS. She called and said, "Are you interested in moving your wife and your two kids to New York?" And I said, "Sure." Again, you know, if you don't risk sometimes, Bert, you don't grow.
That's right.
And so we packed up our two kids, and my wife Tricia and I moved to New York.
Tell me about your trips abroad.
Well, that happened when Guiding Light got canceled, and then Dennis Size from the Lighting Design Group called me and asked if I was interested in joining LDG, and it was a wonderful experience. It really was, and that took me all over the world. You know, I've been to Sri Lanka. Uh, I actually lived in Beijing for a short time while doing a
Really?
project for LDG.
So how was it, when you go to these places, right, and you have your way of thinking, and I'm assuming you might have brought one or two people, but you had to work with the locals, right?
Yeah,
How
yeah.
was the different cultures? How was that for you? How did you deal with that?
That it depended on the country. I'll use China as my first example. It is such a different culture from what you and I are accustomed to. The thing that was probably the most intimidating initially was that we would have to give workshops, if you will, in the studio about what our intent was design wise, why we were using a particular fixture, um, and what our final vision was for the completion of the project. And they're not a culture that just says, "Oh, okay, all 30 of those people in that studio who were listening to you probably had questions and wanted to know why.
They wanted to learn. They wanted to learn from you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And what advice
Yeah.
would you give to someone that wants to get into the business now? Is it crazy to get into this business now?
I would say if I could give any advice, it would be set your mind to what you want to do and go get it. It's
Excellent.
not going to be easy, but
Yep.
just go.
Have
Learn
the
to get to
passion.
know people, know the right people, don't quit, believe in yourself, and show the people that hire that you want it more than everybody else around you.
That's right. Stand out.
Yeah.
Well, Brian, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your patience. I love your
My pleasure.
story, but I really
you,
want to congratulate you on having the 50 years and being able to sit back and enjoy the time now. And thank you
Thank
very
you.
much for coming on today.
It was my pleasure, Bert. And hopefully when I'm in Miami, we can come by and see you, okay?
Thanks, Brian. Definitely.
All right. You take care. All right, buddy. Bye-bye.
That brings us to the end of today's episode of Creative Hub Talk. Thanks for spending your time with us and being part of the conversation. If you found value in today's episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone in your creative circle. This was Creative Hub Talk, voices that move media.